Welcome, listener, in the shadows. We bring stories into the light. Join me as we explore the encounters no one speaks of and the things that watch from the dark. Before we dive into tonight's terrifying tale, a quick question. Do you dare wear the fear? Our exclusive Shadows merch is here. Hoodies, tees, and more, designed for those who embrace the darkness. Get yours before they vanish forever. Link below. A Nightmare from the Deep Woods, Part 1. Day 1. The journey begins. The trip had been in the works for months. It started as a passing suggestion during one of their late-night hangouts, an idea tossed into the air like cigarette smoke. We should go camping, Eric had said, his feet up on Logan's coffee table, an open beer sweating in his grip. Really get off the grid. The others, Logan, Marcus, and Tyler, had agreed with little hesitation. They all needed an escape. Eric and Logan had been friends since college, bound by their love for the outdoors. Marcus was the skeptic, more at home in a dive bar than the wilderness, but he wasn't about to let the others call him soft. Tyler, the quietest of the four, simply nodded along, lost in his own world but always willing to follow the group. They planned meticulously, choosing a remote spot deep in the Minnesota wilderness, far from any known trails. Logan had heard about it from a coworker, a place untouched, serene, and perfect for getting lost in nature. As they packed up their gear in Logan's Jeep, Marcus grumbled. Why do I feel like this is how every horror movie starts? Four dumbasses drive into the woods and never come back. Because you watch too many horror movies, Eric sharp back, grinning. Relax, dude. It's just a few days of drinking, hiking, and pretending we know how to survive in the wild. The drive took hours, the roads narrowing until they were little more than dirt paths swallowed by trees. The deeper they went, the less the world seemed to exist beyond the woods. No cell service, no signs of human life, just an endless stretch of towering pines and the whisper of the wind through the branches. By late afternoon, they arrived at the spot Logan had marked on the map. The clearing was perfect. A small opening in the trees with just enough space for their tents, bordered by a slow-moving river on one side and the dense forest on the other. They set up camp quickly, unloading their gear, gathering firewood, and staking down tents before the sun began to set. Night 1. The first signs, darkness settled fast, bringing with it an unsettling stillness. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows as they sat around it, drinking and swapping stories. The beer flowed, laughter echoing into the night. So, Marcus said, poking at the fire with a stick, "Who's got the best ghost story?" Tyler, who had been mostly silent, finally spoke up. "Ever heard of the Wendigo?" The group groaned. "Yo, come on," Eric laughed. "Isn't that just some old folklore?" Tyler shook his head. "It's real to some people. The Algonquins believed it was a spirit that could possess people, make them cannibals. Others say it's a creature, something that used to be human but turned when it gave in to hunger. Always starving, always hunting. It mimics voices, lures people into the woods." Marcus rolled his eyes. "Nice try, dude. Not buying it." Tyler didn't argue. He just stared into the fire, his fingers tightening around his beer can. The night air was cold, the fire barely keeping the chill at bay. As they talked, a sound cut through the quiet, a long, distant wail. It didn't belong to any animal they knew. It was shrill, stretched out, almost human. The group fell silent. "Coyotes," Logan offered, though he didn't sound convinced. "Nope," Tyler whispered. For a long moment they sat still, listening. The sound didn't come again. Slowly, conversations resumed, but the atmosphere had changed. The trees felt closer, the darkness deeper. That night, as they crawled into their tents, the woods remained unnervingly quiet. No wind, no insects, just silence. Day 2. Unease settles in. The morning light should have eased their nerves, but something felt off. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and something else, something faintly rancid. They brushed it off, blaming the river or a dead animal nearby. They spent the day hiking, venturing deeper into the woods. The trees loomed taller, the canopy so thick it stole away the sunlight. Shadows played tricks on their eyes. More than once, Logan swore he saw movement between the trees, just a glimpse of something pale. "Anyone else feel like we're being watched?" he finally asked. Marcus laughed, but it was forced. "Dude, you're psyching yourself out. It's just trees and wildlife." Eric clapped him on the shoulder. Relax, man, you're just hungover. Still, the feeling didn't leave him. Night 2, the mimicry begins. That night they heard the voice. It came just after they'd put out the fire, when the only light came from the dying embers. A whisper, distant at first. Eric sat up fast. Did you hear that? The others looked at him, confused. Then again from the trees. Eric, come here. It was his mother's voice. A chill ran through him. He stood, eyes scanning the darkness. Mom! Eric, please, I need you. It was wrong. Too smooth, too empty. Like a recording played back with something missing. Don't go, Tyler said sharply. That's not her. Eric took a step back, his heart hammering. The whisper faded. The silence stretched on, deeper than before. We're leaving tomorrow, Tyler muttered. No one argued. Day 3. The hunt begins. They packed in a hurry, but the woods had other plans. The atmosphere had changed overnight. The unsettling silence from the night before still hung in the air, thick and oppressive. They all felt it, like the trees themselves were watching, listening. Each of them instinctively kept glancing over their shoulders, but every time they did, there was nothing. Only shadows, only the constant murmur of the river. The tracks were there. Massive, elongated footprints with deep claw marks gouging the earth beneath their feet, but what unnerved them most were the trees. They were marked. Gashes so deep they looked like something had been dragged through them. No animal Logan knew could leave such marks. The air was rank, stinking of decay and something worse, something sour and foul that made their stomachs churn. These don't look like any animal tracks I've ever seen, Marcus muttered, his voice laced with anxiety as he crouched by the marks. He reached down to touch the dirt around them, but stopped himself. Whatever made these is huge. We're leaving tomorrow, Tyler muttered, his voice tight with unease, like a string about to snap. No one spoke for a moment. They were all too aware of how badly they wanted to leave, how badly they needed to leave. But then Eric, ever the optimist, shook his head. Look, we're already here. If we leave now, we'll just be more paranoid. It'll haunt us the whole way back. We've got the whole day to go through the woods, see what's out there. It could be nothing. Just animals. Maybe some pranksters from a nearby camp. The tracks don't mean anything. We're all just jumping at shadows. Logan was the first to speak up. You heard what we heard last night, Eric. The voice, the wail. I've never heard anything like that before, and I'm not sticking around to see what's making it. Marcus nodded, his expression grim. I'm with Logan. We should head back today while we still have daylight. But Eric, despite the nervous tremor creeping into his voice, was insistent. We can't just leave because of a weird noise, Marcus. We'll be fine. What if we leave and it's just something simple that we could have figured out if we stayed another day? It'll all be fine. We need to calm down. Tyler's gaze flicked nervously to the trees. You don't get it, Eric. There's something wrong out here. This isn't like the other trips we've done. We should listen to Logan. We should leave. Whatever's out there, it's not worth staying for. But Eric was determined. His eyes darted from face to face, his frustration evident. Look, if you want to leave, fine. But I'm not going to let this ruin the trip. It's just your nerves, Logan. Marcus is right. We've been through worse. We're here to have fun, not to sit around in fear. If something happens, then we deal with it, but panicking isn't going to help us. Logan felt the weight of Eric's words, his internal conflict gnawing at him. Part of him agreed. It was easy to let the paranoia get the best of you. But another part was terrified. Something wasn't right. The woods were closing in on them. The feeling of being watched, always watched, was growing unbearable. Tyler's quiet discomfort had grown into outright agitation. Please, Tyler said in a barely audible voice, his eyes locked onto Logan. I don't want to stay another night out here, not with whatever's in these woods. It's not right. If we stay, I'm scared I won't come back. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the silence hung thick between them until Eric's eyes softened. He glanced at Tyler, at the raw fear in his friend's eyes, and then at Marcus's pale face. Slowly, he sighed. You're right, Tyler, Eric admitted, his voice low. It's not worth it. Logan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. They all started moving toward the camp, packing up in silence. The tension that had been building all morning melted slightly, but the unease remained. It wasn't just the fear of what lurked in the woods now. It was the feeling that they were being forced into something bigger than they understood. The very forest itself seemed to be pushing them, twisting their will. But even as they hurried, Logan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being herded. Every movement in the woods felt like a warning. The crack of a branch, the sound of something heavy shifting just beyond their sight. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with the certainty that they weren't alone. As they packed, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of decay and damp moss. The oppressive silence from the night before settled back in, deeper now, almost as though the world was holding its breath. They left the clearing behind, the last of their equipment stowed in Logan's Jeep. But as they began walking down the path, it felt wrong. The trees that had once seemed inviting now towered over them, closing in, casting deep shadows that seemed to shift with every step. Every turn of the head, every movement of the wind seemed to echo with the same unsettling whisper. Logan's eyes caught something out of the corner of his vision, a pale flash of movement between the trees, a quick glimpse. But when he turned, there was nothing. They weren't alone. "Keep moving," Logan muttered to the others, his voice barely above a whisper. But they were all looking over their shoulders now, each of them unable to ignore the mounting dread. Every sound, every shift in the trees, every rustle of the leaves made them jump. The woods were alive with something dark, something waiting. It wasn't until they reached the edge of the forest that the ground shifted beneath their feet. The dirt path that had once led them to their campsite now seemed to stretch endlessly, the path they had taken hours ago. Gone. The trees were different now, twisted, gnarled. The air, thick with rot and something far worse, clung to them like a second skin. "How is this possible?" Marcus's voice cracked. Logan looked at the others, panic rising in his chest. Had they been walking in circles? And that's when they heard it, his voice. Logan's name, soft, familiar, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. Logan. Wait up. Day 4. The descent, the sun rose, but it felt like no warmth could touch them. The air was thick, weighed down by the heavy, damp smell of the earth beneath their feet. Marcus and Eric hadn't spoken much that morning, their eyes darting nervously to the tree line whenever a breeze rustled through the leaves. Tyler had taken to walking at the front of the group, his steps deliberate and quick, as though he could outrun whatever was chasing them. Logan couldn't shake the feeling that every crackling branch underfoot was a warning. They had to get out. They all knew that. But the path that once seemed so simple now stretched on forever. There was no clear way back. The trees seemed to bend inward, blocking their path, twisting in ways that shouldn't be possible. The woods weren't just silent now, they felt suffocating, as if they were trapped inside an endless, pulsing heart. By midday, the group stumbled upon something that should have been reassuring. The remnants of an old logging road, faint tire tracks etched into the earth as though someone had passed through long ago. "We're close," Logan said, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and dread. "We just follow this and we'll be out." But as they followed the road, things grew worse. They passed the same tree over and over again, each time thinking it was a different one. The trees had shifted. The forest was closing in around them. Every glance over their shoulders revealed the same twisted shapes, branches that didn't belong, shadows that loomed too long. Their pace quickened, the panic mounting as though the land itself had become aware of their presence. Wait, Marcus started, but he cut himself off. Logan looked up to find Marcus staring ahead, his face frozen in terror. "That wasn't there before," Marcus said, his voice low and strained. At first, Logan didn't see anything. But then his eyes followed Marcus's gaze and his heart stuttered. There, standing between two trees, was a figure. It was too human, but not quite. The creature's body was hunched, its silhouette too tall, limbs too angular. Its back was bent unnaturally, the shape of its head far too wide. It stood motionless, just watching them. "Don't look at it," Tyler hissed, his voice sharp and frantic. "Don't engage. We need to keep moving." But it was too late. Marcus froze. His eyes locked onto the thing. And then, without a sound, the figure began to move. It didn't walk. It glided, a smooth, unsettling motion, its head snapping to follow their every movement. Its limbs twisted in ways that defied nature, joints clicking and shifting like something that had forgotten how to be human. The ground beneath them seemed to warp with each step it took. the dirt squelching unnaturally as though the earth itself was being pulled toward the creature. The group began to run, but there was no sense of direction anymore. The trees were all the same. The forest had swallowed them whole, and there was no escape. Night 4. The desperation. Nightfall came quickly, but it didn't bring the comfort of darkness. Instead, it was an oppressive weight, like a looming presence that pressed in on all sides. Their campsite had been abandoned. There was no longer any sense of safety in the clearing. They had wandered too far, lost in a maze of their own making. The fire they'd started burned low, its feeble light barely pushing back the blackness that seemed to stretch into eternity. Eric sat, wide-eyed, his back against the tree. He hadn't spoken in hours. He barely moved, except to glance nervously over his shoulder every few moments, as though something might be standing there, just outside the reach of the firelight. Marcus had started pacing again, muttering to himself. His words were barely coherent, his mind slipping away like sand through an open hand. Logan could see it in his eyes. Something was cracking. Something deep inside him was giving way. Tyler, ever the silent observer, sat at the fire's edge, his fingers twitching around his knife like it was a lifeline. But none of them spoke of the thing that had followed them earlier, the creature that had glided after them with that awful wrong movement. They didn't need to. At some point, Logan looked around. Marcus was gone. Panic spread through him like wildfire. "Marcus," he shouted, his voice rasping through the thick air. "Marcus, where are you?" There was no answer. "Tyler." Logan's voice cracked. "Where's Marcus?" Tyler didn't reply. His gaze was fixed on something beyond the fire's edge, something Logan couldn't see. Suddenly, from somewhere deeper in the woods, a voice, Marcus's voice, rang out. It was faint, but it was unmistakable. "Logan, come here." The words were almost drowned by the shrill wail that followed, the same one they had heard on the first night. Logan's blood ran cold. "No, no, no, no." Tyler stood up sharply. "We need to move. Now." But Logan couldn't move. His body felt paralyzed. The air was thick, suffocating. Everything inside him screamed to leave, to run, but his legs refused to respond. He was frozen in place, his eyes searching the woods, the shadows that seemed to close in on him from every angle. Then, without warning, the ground beneath them trembled. It was a subtle shift at first, but then the shaking intensified, enough to rattle the bones of the trees. The noise that followed was deafening, like 1,000 branches snapping, the earth itself splitting apart. Tyler grabbed Logan by the arm, yanking him toward the trees. Run. They didn't need to be told twice. They bolted into the darkness, the air thick with the scent of decay, the ground slick with mud. Behind them they could hear the trees groaning, bending under some unseen weight, and then a snap, a crack, a loud crash, as if something massive was moving toward them, not on the ground, but above it. Logan dared not look back. Day 5. The unraveling. The morning came like a cold slap in the face, though the sun barely pierced the thick canopy overhead. Logan's heart pounded in his chest as he sat on the edge of the clearing, staring at the dirt path before him. The trees around them stood still, unmoving, as if the world itself had frozen. They hadn't spoken since the incident with the voice. No one had dared to. The weight of what had happened, the eerie call from the woods, hung between them like a dark cloud. It didn't feel like a coincidence anymore. Every time they moved, the world seemed to shift around them. Every step was a gamble, and no one knew where the path led anymore. The idea that they might be lost, trapped, was a reality that began to sink in. And that thought gnawed at Logan's mind as they sat huddled in their makeshift camp, trying to gather their bearings. They had retraced their steps, only to find themselves back where they started, as if the forest itself had rewritten the map. Logan looked at the others, each of them worse for wear. Marcus was pacing again, his hands shaking, his lips muttering words that didn't make sense. Tyler sat apart from them, his knees pulled to his chest, eyes hollow and distant. Eric, who had once been so insistent that they push forward, was silent now, his face pale, a shadow of the man who had wanted to just tough it out. "We need to leave," Logan finally spoke, the words tasting sour as they left his mouth. Eric's voice cracked. "We tried. We can't leave. We're stuck." He stared at the trees, his eyes wide, wild with disbelief. "It's like we're trapped in a dream." Marcus whipped around, his face twisted in frustration and fear. If you say dream one more time, I swear to God, I'll— Shut up. Tyler's voice sliced through the tension, his face pale, his hands trembling. This isn't a dream. This isn't some nightmare we can wake up from. This is real, and something's watching us. Something's been watching us from the very start. The words hung in the air, sharp and brittle, like the trees around them. Tyler's face was pale, his eyes sunken, and his voice trembled with something more than just fear. It was despair. We can't leave because we're not meant to. We were never meant to be here. This place, it's not just a part of the woods. It's alive. It knows we're here. Logan felt a cold shiver creep down his spine. The silence that followed Tyler's words felt suffocating, as if the forest was holding its breath, listening to them. The ground beneath them shifted again. It was subtle, a slight tremor that rattled the air, like the low hum of an approaching storm. Logan looked around, scanning the trees for any sign of movement, but the woods were eerily still. The branches hung low, twisting in unnatural angles, and the air was thick with that rancid, decaying smell. Eric stood, his eyes wide, and said, "We have to keep moving. If we don't—" But before he could finish, a bone-chilling scream cut through the air, so sharp and high-pitched it seemed to freeze the blood in their veins. It was a scream that didn't belong to any human, any animal. They couldn't place it, but they all knew it. It was the scream of something hunting them. The howl echoed through the trees, rattling their very bones, causing every hair on their bodies to rise. The sound came from just beyond their camp, so close it felt as if it were breathing down their necks. Without thinking, they moved, running faster than they had before, driven by a primal fear. Their feet pounded against the dirt, branches slapping against their skin, but every time they looked behind them, there was nothing. Just the crushing silence of the woods, but something was still there. They could feel it, the presence that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting. Night 5. The realization, by nightfall, they had long since lost the remnants of hope. The trees had grown taller, more oppressive, and the dark was no longer their ally. The fire they tried to kindle sputtered weakly, its flames licking the air with a sickly orange hue that did little to banish the growing darkness. The shadows seemed deeper now, wrapping around them like suffocating arms. Logan sat with his back against the rough bark of a tree, his eyes fixed on the ground, but his mind wandered. He couldn't stop the memories from rushing back. Flashes of the thing that had stalked them, the voice calling his name, the grotesque figure in the trees. And then there was the truth, slowly creeping up on him, like the cold creeping through the cracks of their camp. The voice, the thing in the woods, they weren't just being hunted, they were being lured. The thought twisted in his gut like a knife. This was no accident. Whatever was out there wasn't just trying to kill them, it was trying to get them to come closer. Suddenly, a soft rustle sounded from the trees. Logan's breath caught in his throat, but when he turned his head, it was only Tyler, pale, shaken, his face drawn tight with the strain of the night. "Tyler," Logan whispered, his voice trembling. Tyler's eyes were wide with terror. He shook his head, taking a step back. "I don't know how long we've been here. Hours, days, I can't keep track anymore." Logan's heart hammered in his chest. "We need to leave, Tyler, we have to leave." Tyler shook his head more violently now, his eyes wild. "You don't understand. We can't leave. We can't escape. This place, it's got us." The trees creaked, groaned in the wind as if agreeing with Tyler's words. Logan's mind raced. He looked at the others. Eric and Marcus sat huddled by the fire, their faces hollow, devoid of any hope. And Tyler was right. They had been walking in circles, retracing their steps only to end up back where they started. The path they thought they knew had unraveled. The forest itself was warping, shifting around them, and they had no control. Eric, his voice thick with exhaustion, spoke quietly. "We were never meant to leave, were we?" Tyler's face twisted in grief. "No, we weren't." And that was when it hit Logan, the truth that had been there all along, just beneath the surface. The Wendigo, the creatures, they hadn't been hunting them because they were strangers to the woods. They were hunting them because they had been invited. And now they were the prey. Logan's pulse quickened. They had wandered too far, too deep, and now they were part of the forest. Every step they took pulled them deeper into the trap. The trees around them seemed to close in, like the jaws of a monstrous beast. The night was no longer a veil of darkness. It was a living thing, suffocating them in its grip. and the presence, the one they had tried to ignore, was closer than ever. The last thing Logan saw before the world went black was the glint of something pale moving in the shadows and the whisper of his own name, soft, distant. Logan, to be continued. If you like the story, tune in for part 2 to see if the group makes it out alive or truly falls victim to the forest. You made it back for now, but the things in the dark never truly leave, do they? They watch, they wait, and perhaps they remember you now too. If you want to hear more, if you dare to listen again, step back into the shadows. Like the video, subscribe, but know this, some doors once opened do not close so easily.